Good morning, folks, and welcome back to Mull on a very calm, still morning. Birds are going for it across the way. I am sitting quite close to a heron right here, so if you hear some very strange noises, that will be what that is. And today's message from Mull, just on cue, is go easy on the salt. Now, a lot of us are not really that aware of the detrimental effect that high salt levels can have upon our bodies. The average adult requires about 6 grams of salt per day to help with fluid retention and electrolyte balance. However, many of us are getting way too much because the issue these days is that there's a lot of hidden salt in our foods. And the stat that always resonates with me is that we have about the same amount of salt in one slice of bread as we have in a packet of crisps. And that might be a bit of a shock to a lot of people. And the reason for that, or one of the main reasons, is it's quite a strong preservative and it increases the shelf life of a lot of products. Unfortunately, the companies that make the food may not be thinking about your shelf life just quite as much, might be thinking a bit more about profit. So we have to be careful just about how much salt we're throwing into our body. Also bear in mind that sometimes salt will be listed as sodium on your food packaging, and if you see that, you need to times the sodium by 2.5 to get the true salt equivalent. Some companies will be a bit underhand as to how they list their salt. So what's the issue with salt? Well, if we have a buildup of salt in our body, it has quite a profound effect upon the inner lining of our arteries. So that's called our endothelium. And if we have high salt levels, then this part of our arteries can get a bit damaged, can lose flexibility, it becomes less pliable basically. And that can increase the pressure in the system, so increased blood pressure. Other things that affect that are increased glucose levels, increased levels of insulin, and increased levels of cholesterol, especially the bad cholesterol that we spoke about just the other day, the LDL cholesterol, the low density lipoprotein. And that sort of concoction creates a real breeding ground for inflammation on the inside of the arteries. And that can lead to us getting some damage in there or an increased buildup of plaque. And that will increase your blood pressure. So think of a garden hose basically, and if you pinch the end of the garden hose, then the water will come out under greater pressure. And that's basically what's happening in our circulatory system. And that pressure backs up on the heart, and that can lead to heart problems or an increased likelihood of things like heart attack or stroke. Even things like arrhythmia, so like unnatural heart rhythms. So we need to be very careful about the amount of salt that we're taking into our system. Also can have quite a profound effect upon some of our major organs. So kidneys will not function as well, and even some evidence to suggest that our brain function will be impaired and that our stress response will be higher if we have high levels of salt in our system. So your release of your stress hormone, cortisol, is increased with high salt levels. So really important that we think carefully about our salt levels. So how are we going to get that down? Well, let's look firstly at some potential salty products that we may eat. So salted crisps, biscuits, nuts, those sort of things are very obvious targets where we could make big wins and try and decrease the amount that we're taking in. Things like sauces, so especially soy sauce, even tomato ketchup, often come with pretty high salt levels, so let's try and reduce our intake of those. At the dinner table, so instead of grabbing this fella and giving it that before we even taste our food, see whether you actually need the salt or not. Or an alternative might be to flip it over and use that side instead. So maybe making some changes to pepper or herbs and spices instead of using salt all the time to flavor our food. And when we're cooking as well, so especially vegetables, I know a lot of people will throw the salt in. You might see a lot of chefs on the telly chucking salt into their vegetables. It's supposed to enhance the taste of the vegetable, but think it just enhances the taste of the salt. And you may have seen your mother, your grandmother doing that. So try not to fall into the same trap of just following culture for the sake of it. We need to reduce our salt intake. Now, talking of taste, your taste buds will renew themselves every 1 to 2 months. And it takes about that length of time for us to change how we're tasting food. So you may find that by taking a lot of the salt out or reducing salt intake, that your food starts to taste a bit bland. Stick with it. It will take time. Now, I know this from personal experience because I've been trying to get my sugar levels down in my tea. And for years, I had 2 sugars in my tea. I know, I'm no angel. I've got it down to 1 now, or maybe half. And if I do take 2 at the minute, it tastes quite horrendous. So it can happen. It just takes a little bit of time. And finally, if this helps, on the food labels, so where it's listed per 100 grams, what you're looking for is if you're on a healthy food or green on the traffic light label, it'll have a salt level of 0.3 or below, which constitutes low. 1.5 grams per 100 grams for salt is considered high. Some stock cubes, it will be about 19 to 26. So they are absolute salt bombs. So be careful with stock cubes and these sort of mixes that you put on meat, because they are really, really high in salt. So that's today's message from Mull. I hope that was helpful. Any questions, please send them in to my personal WhatsApp and I'll get straight back to you. And I'll just give you a final little look around the moors. And as always, stay safe, guys, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.